Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar all around SharePoint agents, everyone's favorite topic. Well, apart from Copilot, but definitely everyone's favorite topic for today. Hang on, Chris, let me spotlight you. We can do that as well. Perfect. So thanks, everyone, for joining. I know there's a bunch of people coming into the room here. Lots of interest within this webinar as well. So we're super excited to talk all around SharePoint agents. A new capability, definitely something that we're finding a lot of interest from customers. Microsoft is pushing it really, really hard here as well. And we're really glad that you are all here today with us. So before we begin, some introductions. So my name is Michael Basarik. I'm one of the co-founders as well as the CEO here at Orchestry. If you've seen me in previous webinars, thank you for coming back. I don't know if I would, so I definitely do appreciate it. Lots of experience in Microsoft 365, as well as SharePoint and all of the good stuff that that we have on offer here within this world. One of my claims to fame is I am a former professional chef. If you are ever interested in talking not only about AI and Copilot, but about food, I am all for it. Would love to kind of hear your thoughts around any of those topics. And if you wish to get in touch with me as well, feel free to reach out to me on X, LinkedIn, or directly through email. And today we are joined by Chris, the master of SharePoint agents. Chris, the master of SharePoint agents. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Michael. Nice to meet everyone. My name is Chris Poteet. I've been in the Microsoft space for over 15 years, particularly in enterprise content management. That's how Michael and I have known each other for a long time, back in the old school SharePoint on-prem days. Specialize in a lot of user experience work and a lot of different writing there. I work for AIS, which we'll talk about here in a second. I wasn't a professional chef, but I spent quite a bit of time in the water. I was just telling Michael before we joined, we're going to go on another snorkeling trip. So it's one of my reliefs is being in the ocean. So that's my fun fact.
Nice. Do you dive as well, Chris?
I do. Yes. It's been a little while, but I do enjoy it.
What's the best place you've dove?
The best place I dove was in Hawaii. So actually, for everyone, I live in the Florida Keys, though. So we come down here for that specific reason, being in the ocean. So there's a lot of access down here as well. But Hawaii still takes the cake.
You got some good stuff there as well. Okay, tell us a little bit about AIS.
Yeah, so AIS is a long-standing Microsoft provider. We've been in business for over 40 years. What really differentiates AIS is that we are completely across all solution areas from a Microsoft partnering perspective. So I'm the modern work lead, so I obviously do a lot in that space, but whether you're in app innovation or infrastructure, security, data and AI, or business applications, whatever it is, we have all the top designations across all of them. A vast majority of our business is in the Azure space, particularly in Azure infrastructure and development, that types of things. But we also help a lot of what we do is about 50% highly regulated as well. So work a lot in the US with highly regulated DoD and federal civilian agents as well as commercial. So yeah, no matter where your company is, which vertical you're in, or which technology you want to look at the Microsoft space, AIS can help you on that journey. So glad to be here.
Awesome. A little bit about Orchestry, if you haven't known about us. So we are a platform sits on top of Microsoft 365, really around helping you get your governance and your security in order for Microsoft 365. Obviously, the last year has all been around Copilot readiness. I think Chris agrees with me, fairly soon it's going to be around Copilot agent management and SharePoint agent management also. But again, we have a solution, really beautiful, really useful, again, to help you get ready, get secure, and get adopting not only Microsoft 365, but obviously Copilot as well. I'm not going to go through all of this stuff, but lots of features, lots of capabilities as well. All right. If you've never been to a webinar at Orchestry before, we try to run them a little bit differently. The last thing we want is just Chris and I to be talking at you for the next 55 minutes here without any questions. So please get engaged. Ask some questions. This is really your time. And again, we're here for you to better answer any questions that you like. For the reason that I chose or wanted Chris to be so kind to do this webinar is Chris was one of the first people that actually wrote a really good LinkedIn post on the challenges around SharePoint agent governance right when they first came out. So again, lots of experience within this space as well, even though this is all pretty new to us. But make sure you ask questions, get into the chat. That's one of the reasons we use Teams as well for these webinars, because everyone's got a Teams account, so you can chat, you can say hello, and do all of that good stuff as well. Getting social as well, follow us on LinkedIn, X, all of that sort of stuff as well. And then a little bit around today's agenda. So first we're going to talk a little bit around, or Chris is going to take the reins here in just a moment after our poll. Brief overview on SharePoint agents, what they are, some of the ways that you can configure these pieces, how you can use them, and everything else. Then we are actually going to do a demo, or Chris is going to do a demo around SharePoint agents also. Again, we wanted this to be, an overview of not just slides, but seeing how the tool actually works. I will then talk a little bit around the governance and some of the management of these SharePoint agents. We know that for some of you, or probably for most of you, that is a little bit concerning in terms of some of the governance and management of SharePoint agents, Copilot agents in general. But remember, we're just going to talk about SharePoint agents in this particular session. Then we're going to do probably a demo of some of the governance and management features. And if we have time, quick demo of Orchestry and lots of Q&A all throughout the session. And Chris, before we begin here with a poll, tell me why you think Microsoft is pushing SharePoint agents so hard at the.
Yeah, I think there's two reasons. One of which is you can see this shift, particularly in the last 6 months, towards agentic development across the market in the Gen AI space. And so what it means to develop agents, create, curate, govern, deploy agents is ever more important as each day passes. So that aligns with the general trajectory of what Gen AI is doing in the market and with all these software providers. But I think the second thing, and I'll talk about this more here in a little bit, is the foundation that SharePoint plays as the content management system in the M365 ecosystem, specifically related to M365 Copilot, which is the marquee Gen AI product, I would argue, for Microsoft. I'll talk a little bit more about, it's just the question that I get from customers is about how do I leverage my SharePoint content in isolated ways and smart ways that I'm used to in the past. And so I think that's another big reason when you see a demo here in a little bit about why it's so important to Microsoft.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think my philosophy on it is I think that the Microsoft Copilot thing has been so big. We hear, I'm sure you hear from your customers as well, Chris, they like it. Most of them are still in the pilot phase. We haven't seen this massive broad adoption, where a customer, if there are 1,000 seats, they're buying Copilot for all 1,000 users, for example. And I think one of those challenges is really around that UX perspective, where Copilot is kind of everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. But what I like about the agents, particularly the SharePoint agents, is it really allows you to create an experience around a subset of content around a particular use case, right? So it's not just Copilot. I'm chatting with, an employee HR agent, or maybe a marketing assistant agent, or whatever else. So I think this is a really, really great move from Microsoft here. Okay, today's poll. Let me go into here. Now, everyone asks what we use here. We use the Microsoft Polls app, which if you've ever used Teams, used to be terrible. It's now actually really, really good. So today's poll is, how familiar are you with SharePoint agents in Microsoft 365? So very familiar. You currently use them in your organization. Somewhat familiar. Maybe you've heard of them, but you haven't started to use them. Not very familiar, or not familiar at all. You basically haven't seen this. So if people can just go in, hopefully you can see this poll here. Yep. There's answers coming in here. 27 responses. We'll just wait for 30 seconds here. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 here. 1 second. Let me stop this. Let me close the poll here. Hang on, I always mess this up, so I can never share the results here. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so out of the folks, thank you for all your results. So 11%, so 10% of you are very familiar. 35% of you, so about a third, are somewhat familiar. Most of you, though, Chris, not very familiar, or not familiar at all about these agents. So you're going to get a bunch of great information from here. All right, Chris, I'll turn it over to you now, and let's talk a little bit about SharePoint agents.
All right. Okay, so let's start looking at everything that Michael talked about, getting into what SharePoints are, the opportunity, why you should be interested. And also, we want to show you the exciting technology here too, but as Michael's going to talk later, there are challenges with it, right? As any new technology and adoption curve happens. So we'll talk through what some of those mitigations are and what you should consider moving forward with SharePoint agents. So let's talk about a high level about what they are, and tell you a little bit of a story about why I'm so excited about SharePoint agents. So it's a new AI powered paradigm, and that means I'm specifically it's in the developing agents specifically for SharePoint isolated content to interact with data from a SharePoint site. This hasn't existed before. Now there are products you may be familiar with, M365 Copilot, which I already mentioned a few times. It does allow you to chat with content, generate, do the whole Gen AI things that you would expect. But what it doesn't allow you to do is isolate a specific aspect of a SharePoint area that you want to dive into, which has been a huge request from customers that I've had. So to me, this is what's most exciting about it. And the roadmap that Microsoft has put in place is going to allow that. I'll tell you a little bit of a story. So a little over a year ago, I wanted to explore some use cases internally. I'm really interested in people operations, HR. I find the field employee experience very fascinating. And so I wanted to look at employee offboarding, which is a process that a lot of companies do. They they go and do interviews, but a lot of companies are really terrible at getting this information proactively, but even when they get it, doing something after they do it. So I want to see, how could Gen AI impact this? Well, at AIS, what we did is we do an interview. It's curated into a Word document, put in a SharePoint library, and it's kind of left to be there. So I wanted to know, how could Gen AI make this better? How could I get those promises of summary, richer insights, all that kind of stuff? So I wanted to go out and look at it. Well, I had an M365 Copilot license, but it didn't allow me to really narrow in like I wanted to on a specific subset of content. So then I guess my second option was looking at Copilot Studio. I kid you not, I spent the better part of a week with Copilot Studio, very frustrated, left, why can't I do this much easier? And I didn't end up getting the results that I even wanted to. And there's another option too. I could have gone to Azure OpenAI and do a custom interface. That's a little bit above my pay grade. There are other people in my company who do that kind of stuff, but all these options didn't give me like the low barrier entry that I wanted to. All I wanted to do was choose a subset of SharePoint content, interact with it, and get the kind of Gen AI excitement results that I was expecting. And I just couldn't get there, and it was so frustrating. So I was left with either trying to wrangle Copilot Studio, which didn't give me the kind of results I really wanted, even though it was easy for me to build, at the time wasn't an agent, but build the conversational interface, or go to Azure OpenAI, which would be expensive, hard to maintain. I would get much better results, but I didn't want that trade-off. So here we are with SharePoint agents, which are coming out, which is a common ask that I have. I would sit on calls, friends who use Copilot, and they say, I have a knowledge repository in a specific SharePoint site. How do I use M365 Copilot to chat with? And I say, you cannot right at the moment, the way you would expect. So here we are. So all that background to say, this is addressing a very serious need that existed in that ecosystem for Microsoft. So what is happening with SharePoint agents? So what is happening there are two things that are possible for you. By default, I'm going to show it here in a second. For every SharePoint site that exists, unless you go through something that Michael will talk about later to disable it, an agent is created by default for your site. So that means you can come to it. I'll show it to you here in a second. You can interact with it, and that's across all content inside of your site. By default, every site. Now, the one thing that you can do that I think is the most compelling part of it is then you can create custom agents, which I'll show you here in a second, that allow you to narrow in on a subset of that content. So if you only want a specific subset of a library or certain documents, or you want a certain aspect of a library, but then you want another site, for example, like you have that control to be able to choose what forms the basis for your knowledge source for the grounding that you're doing inside of the agent. So that's what you get. So I'm going to show off the default agent here in a second. I'm going to show off custom agents here in a second so you can see that interface and what happens. The interesting aspect about all of this, in keeping with that, one of the things that surprised me when Microsoft came out with it, and you'll see also here in a second when I do my demo, is that it's all basically stored as a single JSON file in the library that you created. So there is a .agent file, whatever you name it, .agent, and that's how it's stored, approved, and managed. And Microsoft talks a lot and a big game about it's just another file. You can manage it like another file, permissions, deleting. And that's all well and good, but Michael and I both have had concerns longstanding that has some challenges on reporting, management, control. So it's good on one hand, but it's hard on another, which we'll get into in a little bit. But at least we can show off the configuration. You can see how it works. Okay, so what are the things that you can do with a SharePoint agent? The biggest thing is that you can use natural language processing, natural language questions as you expect from a chatbot-like experience these days about content that's included in that agent. It reasons over them, it's LLM powered. You can do all that. So you can do things like summarize content. You can translate files. You can compare them as well. You can ask the agent to find files. I think this is one of the things that has improved so much in the M365 Copilot ecosystem, now coming down to SharePoint agents, is for a long time, search was always talked about this this holy grail that we can get in ECM to find the best search possible. And we struggled with it. We talked, and people like Michael and myself will go out and talk a lot about advocacy about metadata, structuring, information architecture, governance, and all the things are great. But the technology never really got to where it could be, I can really hone in on findability. I think that is changing in 2024, 2025. These experiences are totally different. Generative AI has brought findability in those type of experiences to the reality that we always wanted. So if I want to look and find something, it's a really great way to do that. You can understand how a site content is used. I'll show up like what's most recently updated here, what's coming into this site. So you can ask questions about as a management of the site. What I think is really cool, and I think a lot of people are sleeping on for SharePoint agents, if you have a specific scenario where you have a hub site, and many of you, if you're managing a SharePoint online environment, you probably have one, at least for an intranet of some kind, and you have sites that are associated with a hub. The really great thing about SharePoint agents, which I wasn't expecting, is that on the default SharePoint agent that comes in the hub site, actually indexes and grounds across content inside the entire hub. So what does that mean in like layman's terms? It means you can have a chatbot for your intranet completely out of the box that is very, very powerful. So people can come. This is one of the things we wanted to do. We spent so much time honing landing pages of intranets, and for good reason. But now someone can come to it. I'll show you the UI in a second, and they can ask where is what content and interact with it across your intranet in an easy interface. So that's a really exciting capability if you're thinking about SharePoint agents.
Hey,
and
Chris,
Yep, sure.
just one more thing. You bring up a really interesting point, like the idea of creating an agent for a particular hub. What have you found that's starting maybe to impact some of the information architecture decisions you're making on the intranet side? Because that would be really fascinating, having, let's say, a hub for a particular region or for a particular type of business units, and then putting an agent on that as well.
Yeah, good question. I think right now it's still in the early phase where we would make a decision around hub boundaries for segmenting search results that's still very similar today. So for example, if I have a project management hub, if I have an intranet hub, I would create those unless I did a parent-child hub relationship. I wanted isolated search results, permissions, those types of things over there. So I think that consideration is still there. So on an information architecture level, if you're thinking, how does this impact my SharePoint agents? I think it's very similar, except now it's beyond search. Now it's I can interact with content in an agent experience. So I think there's going to be more to come on how it impacts IA, though, as the product evolves and interacts across the tool, which I know you believe as well. So there's some remains to be seen, but I think that's the biggest thing. Think about your data isolation when you think about your hubs and IA and how an agent will interact with that.
And just one more thing here, Chris, because this is going to be the question of the webinar. So let's get this out of the way here. Do SharePoint agents grounding respect custom permissions in your SharePoint site?
It does. And I'm going to talk. I have a nice table. I'm going to show you. So if I can table that for 1 second, I have a nice table I'll show you. But that's one of the big things, along with I mentioned it being a file, is that it respects all the file structures and things that you're used to in a SharePoint site. So it's exactly the same. And I'll walk through specifics around how that breaks down here in 1 second.
Amazing.
Okay. Lastly, the entryway of agents into the next tier. Michael's going to talk about roadmap, where there's a lot of really great stuff. I'm really excited about some of these things that are going to show up, like an M365 Copilot and other experiences. But right now, and I'll show it to you, you can add an agent to an MS Teams chat and ask questions to it and interact with a chat experience. And I'll even show off how it prompts if someone doesn't have access to the content, to that question here. So there's going to be a lot more coming as SharePoint agents as the interaction points where it start becoming more than just SharePoint or a Teams chat. You're going to see it in other different ways, again, which we'll talk about here in a second. Okay, I'm going to breeze through this because I'd rather show you, but I mentioned that it's created for every site unless you have configured that site with something called restricted content discovery, which again, I'm not going to take Michael's thunder. He'll talk about that here in a little bit. Unless you have turned it off, and you have to do that in a opt-out way, because by default it's there, you can go, as long as you have permissions, at least edit rights on the site to be able to do it, and any member or owner can be able to create it. And there are several places that you can create it. You can create it on the landing page for a site. You can create it inside a library itself. I'll show off some of those interaction points here in a second. And then I'm going to talk here a little bit in the demo about what does it look like to actually create an agent. There are several things that you can, when I'm talking about creating an agent, I'm talking about I want to create a custom one to a subset of content. I can change things like name, image, description, which I'll show you, source grounding. So what content do I want to be under this agent's purview, welcome messaging, starter prompts, and then importantly, the agent instructions for those responses. So I'll walk you through that wizard here in a second. You can see if you worked at all with the new very, very no-code agent builder and the M365 Copilot experience, it looks and behaves very similarly. So it has a foundation of Copilot Studio. You'll notice at the bottom there is a button that says Add Advanced Customization in Copilot Studio. Interestingly, Microsoft adds that button, but it doesn't do anything other than show you can't do anything with it right now. But the idea is that it will eventually be extensible in Copilot Studio to do more interesting things over time. Okay, so let's talk about permissions models. So a very important question, because I mentioned this is the big selling point of SharePoint agents is unlike if I'm developing a custom agent using Teams Toolkit or Copilot Studio, and I'm deploying with the Teams app model, I got to worry about different permissions and things I might not be familiar with. Now it just exists inside of the SharePoint site. So for example, you can see who can interact with an agent, what you expect, a visitor, a member, and owner. They can interact, ask questions. But you would expect that a visitor, like they can't create new content, they cannot create a new agent. So they can't. So you have to at least be a member with edit permissions. You have to be an owner. You can share an agent, meaning you can copy a link and share it with someone else with a visitor, but that's all a visitor can do. Now, to be able to, I mentioned to create, to edit them, you have to, or to delete them, you have to at least have those edit rights, the same as you would expect for managing content in the SharePoint site. And you can see the owners, we'll talk about approvals. So that means you make it available for more users, and then you can set an agent as the default in the site, which you can't currently do at the moment, but you will eventually be able to override and make new agents the default, so you don't have to land with that default one there. So again, visitor, member, owners, if you're familiar with SharePoint at all for the last 20 years, you're familiar with those groups, and they respect them just as you would creating content. To that question that was asked earlier.
And this is just, maybe just go back here, Chris. This is something that is either going to be good for your organization or not so great, because again, these agent files are just like normal files, right? It is a file in the end, but really it has far more power than just a standard file. And the problem with this is because site members with edit permissions can go and create new agents, delete agents, and edit agents, this is where it gets interesting. So a good thing we hear from a lot of our customers, Chris, you'll probably hear this as well, is, okay, I only want my site owners to go and create agents. Right? And I want them to control those. Well, that's not really possible unless you start doing a bunch of funkiness with breaking permissions on those individual items and everything else. But by default, just so you folks know, every person that can go and create, upload, edit a document within a SharePoint site now can go and create an agent, right? And that's where it gets really, really interesting here as well. Actually, Chris, let's answer this as well from Marco. Do you need a Copilot license to use an agent, or do you only need one if you're creating them?
Okay, so Michael's going to talk a little bit more about licensing, but right now there's two models, a consumptive one, which you set up a pay-go meter, like an Azure consumptive subscription one, or if you have an M365 Copilot one, it includes both creating and interacting. You have to have a license right now to do either of those. So that is, so if you don't have a license, you can't go and interact with an agent. You won't see the UI at all. So you have to have one of those two set up for you. Now, the one exception to that is right now, at least until June 30th, if your tenant has at least 50 licenses of M365 Copilot, by default, it turns on a preview with like 10,000 interactions a month as your quota for anyone in your organization to be able to use SharePoint agents. So keep that in mind. If you didn't know that, it is opt out, not opt in. Microsoft turns it on. But after June 30th, to answer your question, you have to at least have a consumptive meter, or you have to have a license to even see the UI.
Yeah, so Marco, this is really, it's like, it's the typical consultant answer of it depends, right, Chris? But the thing that Microsoft did at the moment is that if you have at least 50 Copilot licenses, right, anyone in your tenant is going to be able to go and create agents and start using them during this promotional period, right? Now, what Microsoft is trying to do is to get as much virality of these agents, I think, going forward. The problem is, if that's going great, right, you've got non-Copilot licensed people being able to create and edit and use these agents. You've got 10,000 messages, right? I think it's every month here.
It is.
But at the end, you're going to have to pay for that, right? And that can get really expensive really, really quick, especially if this catches on, right? Then you're going to have to start making decisions on, do you license it as a pay-as-you-go model, or do you license it by allowing people to have Copilot licensing? We'll talk about all of that later on. But especially at the moment, it's in this kind of strange experience where it looks like anyone can create agents wherever they want, right? Yeah. Even without Copilot licenses, because of this promotional period. And as Chris mentioned, it's opt out. You specifically have to opt out of it, right? Yeah. Microsoft just decided to turn it on for all of you folks because they think agents are a good idea. Make sure that you can look at that as well. And Thomas, I'll answer your question here as well, Thomas. Can the pay-as-you-go quota be limited per site? How can you manage costs per agent? I don't think, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I know there's nothing available at the moment to manage it on that granular level here, Thomas. I know on the roadmap, when I get to the roadmap slide, it's like the biggest slide on earth because there's everything on the roadmap. There is going to be a way to be able to manage those, manage the cost a little bit better as well. I don't know, Thomas, is it going to be per site or per agent? I'm not too sure, but I know it's on the roadmap.
Yeah, right. Well. Thomas, right now it's at the subscription level, cost budgeting. We're familiar with Azure consumptive meters, but they just promised recently to come out with more granular departmental. I assume that's intra-based. We don't know the details. Flagging of subscriptions and different quotas for areas of content and users. We just don't know what that looks like, but it's been discussed. So we'll see.
Okay, two more questions, Chris, and then we'll bust on it here. How many Copilot licenses do you need promotion to kick in? 50, right? 50 full Copilot licenses here, Edward. And then Rhonda, only our SharePoint admin has the full license. The rest of the org only has access to Copilot Studio. What is the difference and how do we utilize Studio to create agents? That's a good question.
Yeah,
I don't know the answer to that one.
So the one person will be able to see the SharePoint Agents UI. They can interact and create. No one else will be able to see them or interact with them. So if you want any other kind of SharePoint Agent-esque type capability, you're gonna have to build something custom in Copilot Studio. You're not gonna get access to this model right now with only one license.
So. Awesome answer. All right. Hopefully that answered, folks. Let us know.
Okay. All right. Move along so I can get through my demo and Michael has other great stuff to talk about. So I mentioned you can't edit, despite there being a button saying you can in Copilot Studio. You cannot do that. So it's all right now just in the no-code UI. You can't edit the ready-made agent, but that means the one that's given by you default in your site, but that's promised that we'll be able to do that. You cannot right now include OneDrive content. You can include content sometimes from other sites, but it's promised it's forthcoming. So you have to be mindful of what you can do for grounding. If you do a lot of labeling, sensitivity label specifically, you can't apply a label to it currently for some reason. So if you want to manage it with DLP, you have to use the extension as a condition.
This is insane to me, considering the push of applying sensitivity labels, right? Yeah, for one of the most important files, you can't apply a sensitivity label yet. I'm sure it's happening, but it seems very strange.
Yeah, very strange. It might be due to encryption. I don't know, but right now that could exist in your label, but right now you cannot. You cannot change the default agent, but that's being promised. That's the thing you're going to see. You can't do this now, but it's being promised, right? Lists aren't currently stated. It's only pages and documents, but again, that's being promised. To me, this is a big deal that I hope changes sooner rather than later. It supports standard Office documents, PDF text, HTML open documents, and others. They're promising other things like videos and OneNote, but that's still on the roadmap. And then right now it's only in English, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. Real difference about if you talk about Copilot and SharePoint agents. Here's some differences. SharePoint agents, they're only on SharePoint content. They use those site permissions. Your governance is limited by file management and very few options. The interface right now is only in SharePoint and Teams, and you get that one bill for every site. And we mentioned the consumptive or licensing model earlier there as well. But this whole discussion about Copilot agents is for more advanced scenarios and have different extensibility points and different UI points. So you can include things like external data, which I assume will come in SharePoint agents with Copilot Studio, but we'll have to see. It's vastly more customizable using a traditional Copilot agent extensibility. Use the team app deployment governance model. You can see it across Teams Copilot applications. There are a few by default created by Microsoft, such as Facilitator, Interpreter, if you've heard of them. And then licensing works very similar. You have to have a license or consumptive, but you get a lot more extensibility options. So I assume these will come together more and more as the SharePoint agent and Copilot story comes together. But right now, here are some important differences that exist there. Okay, so let me briefly come over here and move through this, so then I can turn it over to Michael. But at least to show you on a UI level what is happening by
We got
default.
lots of time. We got lots
Okay,
of time, Chris, and this is super useful. So we're good.
okay, okay. So I have my Project Falcon team site out here that I'm working with, and you can see I came to the site. I click this button up here in the Office Suite bar, and you can see from the screenshot earlier, I'm getting this UI that shows me, what is the name of the agent that I have, a starter message, which I'll talk through customizing and starter prompts. And then you'll see the starter text down here says, ask a question about this site. So right now, by default, I can ask anything. So if I want to say like, what kind of content is in this SharePoint site, for example, I can do these kinds of like content overview types of questions. And then as you would expect from a Gen AI experience, I can narrow into, well, tell me more about this specific content, or give me a summary of this specific document, or whatever you look like would it be. And this UI is very familiar if you use M365 Copilot or have seen it. These are the types of things you expect: starter prompts, welcome messaging, natural language processing. You see the response here. And then down, you'll see, as you would expect, the references inside of any good Gen AI experiences. So it's helping you to watch out for hallucinations, different things, and you can go and narrow in on any specific content that you want based on it. And these also have the associated footnotes that show you where it's coming to. So again, a very familiar UI. Just the power of it now is I don't need to go to M365 Copilot. I can come to a specific Microsoft, let's say the flow of work, right? I'm staying in the flow of work. I'm in my specific SharePoint site, and I'm interacting content right here. So this is a brief look at like what a default agent looks like. What this really becomes interesting though is when you want to start creating agents. Like, and you want to say, okay, I don't want all the content in my site to be, I want to narrow in on specific content, because as you decrease the amount of content you're using for grounding and what it reasons over, you theoretically get better results. And that's what I find here. So I have this project briefs library. I want to create an agent just for a subset of this content. So I can do it a couple different ways. I can go here, go new agent. I can click create an agent over here. I can also click over here in the UI that exists across over here. I can create an agent. So there are multiple ways that you can do this. I'm going to go ahead and click this button. And I'm going to get, by default, when I click that button, it says, you've got an agent by default for this specific content source. Okay, that's great. But now I want to go in and show you the editing process and what it looks like. So I go into edit, and I'm going to breeze through a little bit, but it's typical branding, things that you would expect. I can give it a specific name if I want. If I don't want it to mirror the specific document library name or source that I'm using, I can change the icon, give it a description, standard overview type of stuff. Over here is where it gets interesting and allow you to specify the sources. I mentioned that Copilot Studio struggle that I had because I was trying to narrow in on site collection and I just couldn't get it to work for like a long time. I'm able to do this in 10 seconds. So here, by default, it chooses the site here. And you can see under here, it's showing the specific library. I'm going to delete these just for a second so I can actually show you what this actually looks like here. So I'm going to choose the site just so I can have a more fine-grained look at the specific content here. So I choose my site, and I can choose, do I want to source from the entire site or a subset of the site? So I'm going to choose a subset, allow me to add document libraries and folders. I get this UI. Again, if you're familiar with like OneDrive, copy, move UIs, I come back here and I choose my project brief library. I can choose up to 20 distinct sources. This can include another site. It can include a folder, which includes everything within that folder, or individual documents, but I'm limited to 20. So I'm going to choose my Project Falcon presentation, my brief, my competitor analysis. You see down here is telling me 3 of 19. But if I choose this roadmap, despite it having 2 items, it only goes 1 against my meter. So that's one other thing to note. If you want to have lots more documents in here, instead of selecting individual ones, grouping them by folder, and you can select them here. But for this, I'm just going to choose these 3 different documents here, and I can add other sites if I want. But now I'm going to go to behavior. So I can choose, I can update my messaging, I can update my starter prompts if I really want to do something specific, like highlight key competitors. For Project Falcon, for example, I can choose these here. And as you would expect over here, down here is a very important, often overlooked part about the instructions for agents. So I'm giving the orchestration some specific direction to how I want it to use. So I want to use all the specified SharePoint content paying specific attention to competitors and our advantages, and then return responses in an informal tone. Because everyone does formal, so I'm going to do an informal one, right? So I can be as specific I want about giving instructions to get those results. So I'm going to save this. So it's saved, it's telling me over here. I can close this. So it's opening up by default my project brief agents, right? So I can say over here. So you can see I've got my file. This is a JSON-based file. This is the .agent that exists inside of my library. And now I can switch between my agents, either my site one or my project brief one. And I can start doing things like I can click on this folder and it says, ask a question about this. I want to summarize this document. Again, very standard Gen AI-based things that I would expect to be able to do in one of these types of experiences. I can do this over here as well. It'll come through it, give me a description, and I'll get my summary over here as you would expect, right? And again, this is scoped to whatever I choose for the content source. So I chose those 3 documents. That's the only thing that's going to look at. But I can ask it other types of questions, like I can ask questions about the competitor analysis, like, or what considerations should we think about for entering the e-bike market, for example, right? So it can look, and it's intelligent enough to go and orchestrate over my documents and say, where is it in a specific document that I want to look at, and come back with results from my document that I've written over here. It's mentioned regulatory, education, all these types of things for me to consider. And again, it's going to give me those footnotes to tell me where to be able to go. So that's all very exciting. So you can I'm just showing you this very briefly, but imagine the amount of content your organization has in SharePoint and how you can unlock asking questions in natural language and working with content across large sources of data. So whether you're thinking about an HR use case or IT or your product marketing or sales or whatever it looks like, you can finally, I think, powerfully unlock this content. I'm going to show you one more thing and then turn it over to Michael, and that is showing you inside of Teams. So I'm going to copy this link up here inside this UI. What this allows me to do then is go over to Teams. So I'm going to chat with my coworker here, Nicola. All right. And now in this chat, I'm going to add this conversation. I'm going to add this agent. It's going to allow me to add to it. Okay. So I'm going to click send to her. All right, so I've got my agent over here. I can choose to add it to this chat. So now I can chat with Nicola and ask questions together about what content exists in here. So I'll come back here in a second. So I'm going to ask about our competitors in this specific space. So that means it's going to, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the agent here. You have to mention the agent.
Oh, nice. You actually got to mention it. Very cool.
Yep. So now it's going to go out, do the processing, do the reasoning, come back here, and it's going to come back. And what's interesting that as it's processing this document to the question about permissions earlier, it's going to go through and it's checking, does this individual that I'm chatting with actually have access to the content that exists inside of the SharePoint site? So it's going to come back here in a second and say, and tell me about Nicola's content. Okay, so you see, Nicola is not added to the SharePoint site. So it's going to tell me, do I want to actually show it to Nicola? So here's the response that it's giving me and saying, should Nicola have access to this content? It's saying, here's where it's coming from, and here's the result. So I can choose, it's respecting that permissions. She doesn't have access to the site. Should I send it? Send or don't send? Okay, I'll go ahead and send it. And it can go and she can see the content. So again, very permissions trimmed.
That's gold. That is very cool. I never knew that's gold star by Microsoft. That is very, very smart. Very smart.
Yep. And the last thing, just very briefly, Michael will talk about it briefly. If you're a site owner, you can then make agents that are being ready. You can set them as approved, meaning other people can get to them and use them. So if I go to set as an approved agent, what happens is the file is moved into a special folder in the site assets library. So if you go here into site assets, there's a Copilot folder, Copilots, approved, And then here's my agent. So this is now available for other people to come and interact with. So you have a little bit of control of that approval process. So that's a brief look at SharePoint agents, what they do, how to create and manage them at a SharePoint level, and some of the capabilities. And I'm just scratching the surface. But if you can't tell in my voice, I'm very excited about this technology. Despite some of the initial governance challenges, I think this is going to be a very important addition to M365. So thanks for letting me show it to you.
Perfect. All right, Chris, a couple of questions and I'll take over here from another Chris. From Chris G here. Does that change her permission to the site files overall or just in this agent chat?
It does not change any permissions to any underlying files using the grounding at all. It does not. So there's no permissions changing happening if that's the question.
Perfect. Question from Edward. So is that file in two spots now? I was actually going to ask the same question. Once it gets moved from the, does it get moved from the document library into the site assets approved?
Yes, it does. So
it does.
If you go back here to my library, it's no longer here. It's marked as approved over there now. So if you want to edit it, you go to the site assets library. It does not stay in the original location.
Okay, and we got a bunch of questions here, folks. I'm going to take two more and then I'm going to have to jump in here. Ids, good to see you again. Does it work with custom metadata such as tags in the term store? For example, can it show me all the documents with the tag memo? I doubt it.
Yeah, no, it doesn't right now. In fact, the whole metadata story with these M365 Copilot Gen AI experience is still a lot TBD. Unfortunately, I hope that improves sooner rather than later, but right now, no, it doesn't.
Okay, one more thing from Chase. From Sarah here. So she would only see the response, but if she clicked in any of the links, her access would be denied.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay, one more thing here. While I'm getting ready, can you show us how the agent was added to the chat again?
Oh, yeah, sure. So all you have to do is when well, I'll show you. So you come up here and you open the agent from this UI up here, which I've shown a couple times, and there's a link here that opens. Let me change to my specific Project Falcons agent. There's a copy link for Teams. You copy it. Then you come over here, you paste it in, and you say add to this chat, and then you can reference it like I did right here. So it's just a copy link.
I actually didn't know that. That's awesome. That actually is very, very cool. All right. Chris's part of this presentation is much more joyous than my part here because I'm going to be talking about governance and some challenges here as well. Awesome. If anyone's got any questions, keep putting them in. We'll get to them eventually. And if not, we always do things about them. All right, Chris, amazing demo. We love agents. I think me and you are also slightly concerned about the current governance and management story, right, in terms of these agents. Now, all these things are very, very new. And once I get to the roadmap slide, which is literally like 50 things, this is going to change really quickly. But at this point in time, April the 17th, there's some, I wouldn't say gaps, but there's definitely some things that could be improved on. Let's first talk about tenant level reporting, right? Pretty limited at the moment, right? So again, if you want to understand what SharePoint agents have been created, who's using them and so forth, there's kind of three different ways at the moment. One of them is with PowerShell. So there is a PowerShell commandlet here. Oh, the commandlet was being removed. I'll get it for you. There is a PowerShell commandlet that you can run that actually shows you all of the SharePoint agents that are within your environment. That's one way. The other way is also through Purview. If you go and look at the audit log, you can monitor things like agent creation and usage details and everything else. If you've ever used the Purview audit log, it is pretty painful to use. So it's not the easiest experience. Again, that's going to improve pretty quickly here. And if you are using SharePoint Advanced Management, and you should be, and if you're not, just buy one Copilot license and you get this feature for free on your tenant, regardless of how many people you have. Again, that's changed very, very recently from Microsoft. There is going to be a report coming out, which is going to be the Copilot Agents report. That's going to give you a lot of fine-grained information. The site, the agents, how many times it's being used, all of that sort of good stuff as well there. So there's lots of things there. That's at the tenant level as well. On the kind of reporting at the site level, there's not really much there, to be honest with you. Remember, this is just another file, right, as far as Microsoft's concerned. So all of the file reporting that you can do on agents. But as we both know, the file reporting capabilities out of the box in M365, not really that great. But again, you can do that. So one of them is looking at the file stats, right? You can look at the file statistics and you can see how many times that agent file has been clicked on. If you want to find all of the agents that you have within your particular site, you just do a search for star.agent, right? Because all of those agent files are essentially files with a .agent suffix on them. The other thing that you can also use is the site usage page as well through here. So again, you can kind of understand which agents have been the most popular as well. Not particularly great, to be honest with you, but there is some capabilities there also, particularly at the site level. So for site owners in particular, expect this story to get much better in terms of understanding, what my agents are, how are they being used, and everything else. Yep, Chris, thank you. For some reason, it got removed when we made the slides pretty. So appreciate you putting that in on the power thing. The other thing as well, the other capability as well is DSPM. So this is a relatively new feature, once again, part of Microsoft Purview, called Data Security Posture Management for AI, or DSPM. Again, it's essentially an aggregation of different types of information from Purview into one particular area, but it can be very, very useful, particularly from an agent perspective. There's multiple different areas within here. There's like an overview section. There's a recommendation section. There is a report section as well, which can show you Copilot in interactions. The other thing also is there's an activity explorer. So this activity explorer is kind of a better version of what you get in out-of-the-box Purview, because again, it's very specific around Copilot agent and AI agent interactions, which could be good. The last thing that there is here as well is what's called a data assessment. There's an oversharing assessment within here as part of DSPM. Again, it's pretty good. Lots of capabilities there. It's going to show you what a high level from an oversharing perspective. And that, again, is very, very useful because, as Chris mentioned, all of this SharePoint agent stuff relies on underlying permissions as well through there as well. So there's lots and lots of things as well. So that's from a kind of reporting side. If we want to start to govern some of these things, what can we do? And again, there's a few things that we've got in here. We've pasted some links within here. Again, if you want to control access to SharePoint agents, as Chris mentioned, I forgot to put this in the slide, Chris, even though you put a comment in, so I apologize. One of the ways to do that, if you don't want people to have the ability to create or use agents, you have to use something like restricted content discovery through here. The problem is if you apply that to a site, they can't use Copilot or Microsoft 365 Copilot for that site either, right? So restricted content discovery is not just for agents, it's for everything. So again, it's kind of, you can't have the option at the moment to say, well, we want to use Copilot for this content, but we don't want people to be able to create agents. That's not possible at the moment if you apply restricted content discovery to that. That's correct, right, Chris? I'm not talking nonsense here. Yeah, okay, Chris is nodding, so that's
correct. Yep.
The other thing is around this promotional period that we've talked about as well. So if you have an environment and you're using Copilot and you've got over 50 licenses and you're seeing people are creating agents and you're like, what the hell's going on? Because someone created an agent, but they don't have a Copilot license. This is why you have to opt out of that process. The other thing is setting the pay-as-you-go billing. We'll talk about that as well. And then the other thing around the Copilot kind of agent insights report, we've got a link here, is essentially this through here as well. Let's talk a little bit around governance of these agents at that site level. Now, Alan's got a question here. Please reiterate in what way SharePoint agents need good governance and what are the risks. The risks at the moment is that any site owner or any site member can create, edit, and delete agents, right? That's the current challenge at the moment. So, typically, because this is just a file, if I am in a SharePoint site and I have edit access to files, I can start going and creating agents, right? So expect to see something like agent sprawl happening. Remember when we launched Teams in SharePoint, people didn't know what they were doing. They created SharePoint sites, they called them test, all of that sort of stuff, right? They have the ability to essentially do that as well. So that's currently the challenge here, that anyone can go in, create, edit, and delete those agents. The other issue, and I think this is the bigger issue, is that let's say a site owner goes and creates an agent and people start using that. If I can go and edit a file, I can go and edit the underlying agent, maybe put some nefarious instructions in there, Chris. So for instance, instead of, you know how Chris said, reply back to this in a non-formal manner, you can put something in there like reply back to this in a comical manner and replace the word X with the word Y, right? Yeah. That's a really subtle thing, but that'll make a huge impact. And as a user, if you're using that agent, you don't know that it was edited, you don't know the underlying instructions either, that can cause a very significant kind of vector, right, for attacks through here. So that can be an issue. Again, we talked about this, and Chris talked about this at the moment. You can't currently edit the ready-made agent that comes with every SharePoint site, right? So again, every SharePoint site is going to have that agent in there, and Chris showed you that in the top right-hand side. The other thing which gets really odd is that depending on where you create the agent, it's going to reside in different places, and whether it's approved or whether it's not approved. And this gets really, really confusing. If you go and create an agent from a document library, that .agent file is within that document library. So Chris just showed you that. If that agent then gets approved, then it goes into the site assets approved folder. If you go and create an agent, however, from the homepage or that chat panel, then it goes in the Copilots folder, not in the approved folder, but just in the Copilots folder itself. So again, it can be a little bit difficult to try to understand what's going on as well through here and where these things are. And particularly as well for people going in and kind of creating agents, we've seen this already, that people go into a document library, they start creating all of these agents, different people are using different agents, and it gets really, really strange and really, really confusing as well. Now, if you want to now start managing these kind of agents, right, at the site level, I mean, you can do this in a number of different ways, but these are kind of hacks, right, in terms of what we want to do. But one of the things that we suggest from a governance perspective is, again, have a series of approved agents, right? The approved agents should always be the ones which you want people to use, and again, have them available in that top right picker. One of the issues, though, and I think someone mentioned this within the chat, is that if an agent gets created, let's say by a site owner, and then the site owner goes and approves that agent, if someone goes and edits that agent and does something nefarious to it, it still stays as approved. There's no concept of it kind of having, you know, it's been approved, but I've edited it and it needs to be approved by site owners again. That doesn't happen. So once it's approved, it's always going to stay there and be approved as well through here. So again, it can be kind of some various vectors there, or various attack vectors through here as well. Let's talk about some of the costs as well through here as well. Okay, so if a user has a Microsoft 365 Copilot license, they're paying the $30, they can go crazy with agents as much as they want. If they don't, you have to set up pay-as-you-go for that subscription piece. Now, pay-as-you-go is 1 cent per message, but every interaction with a SharePoint agent is classed as 12 interactions, right? Now, previously, Chris, I think it used to be like 32 or something, right? So it's actually gone down a lot through here. So what most organizations are probably going to be buying, what we call these message packs, $200 per tenant for 25,000 messages. You're kind of saving about 25%, right, of cost. So it's not a huge saving to buy these. And in particular, if you think about it, if you've got an organization of 1,000 people and someone accidentally puts on an agent on the intranet homepage, and there's 1,000 interactions there, like you're going to go through that money really quickly. And those costs are going to go through the roof. So again, you have to make sure that you're keeping that in mind also. At the moment, there's not too much from a costing perspective in terms of how you can control these. I know someone asks, can you limit the cost on a per site basis? At the moment, it's just done at the subscription level, right? And we have heard of customers where someone's gone in, particularly through this promotional period, stuck an agent on the HR homepage, removed the HR homepage, right? Put a link to an agent somewhere. People started using it, and they get a bill for 25 grand, right? And they have no idea that that's actually happened. So again, make sure that you are careful around those pieces. Someone talked about governance. these are some of the governance challenges that we see currently with agents. This is going to change very quickly, but this is what we see. So the first one that people want is, I only want owners or a subset of people to create SharePoint agents. It's not at the moment, right? You can't actually do that. If you have edit or contribute to a SharePoint site, you have pay-as-you-go set up, for instance, or during this promotional period, they can go in and they can start creating agents willy-nilly, right? So again, that's something you have to consider. The other thing is this approved agents. Like that approved agent thing, you would think that Microsoft would do corresponding capability to unapprove an agent. Unfortunately, they don't. Once it's approved, it sits there. If someone can go in and edit it and do whatever they want, it still stays as approved. The other thing for me, which I find is really odd, there's no real way for an end user to easily see what sources an agent is using, right, Chris? Like if you've got an agent, you can't actually see it's using this site or another site. That's one thing. Yep. The other thing, which is really sneaky by Microsoft, if anyone's noticed this, you can't hide that agent link in a document library. You can remove it, but it's going to appear. I think it appears within 24 hours, right? So there's that. Again, there's no way to edit the default agent that's going to be created. There's no way to unapprove an agent as well through here. And this is the big one, right? Any member, including guests, could edit an agent file and inject prompts or change instructions into it. That's the biggest governance challenge that we see. We've been talking to Gartner about this as well. That's also, right, a governance challenge there as well, because remember, this is just a file. Now, it's not all bad news here either, because the roadmap, and I've been talking about this, is huge for the SharePoint agent stuff. If you ever want to know, Chris, you probably agree with me, if you want to know where Microsoft are investing, you just go into the roadmap and you see how much crap they have on a particular area. And SharePoint agents are basically going gangbusters here. Yep. Now, I say July 2025. Remember, this is the Microsoft roadmap. July 2025 means any time between July 2025 and July 2029. So take this with a grain of salt here. It could be a long time. SharePoint agents is going to be available in SharePoint pages via a web part. I know someone asked here that question. That's coming. SharePoint agents is going to be available in Teams channels. We're going to have some really nice usage stats across all SharePoint sites. So that reporting capability is going to be coming in. SharePoint agents being able to manage the shared apps is going to come in as well. So much more control from the IT management side. Couple of things which I find really interesting, Chris. SharePoint agents available in the Team App Store.
Yep. Yeah, this is the thing I'm most excited about, because it will solve that use case in question of customers wanting to be able to go to like M365 Copilot Experience, reference a subset of SharePoint content, and get robust results. That will bring that.
I like it. Agent usage stats per SharePoint site is coming. Some agent insights. SharePoint agents in mobile is coming as well. Right, so lots of stuff here as well as some other stuff I couldn't find the links to the roadmap for. So adding OneDrive as grounding content, support for more file types, so images, meeting recordings. I think is a huge one, Chris, as well as OneNote notebooks also. And then someone mentioned this already: the inclusion of SharePoint lists for general reasoning here as well. Now, finally, if you do want to learn about agents, and SharePoint agents in particular, Gartner is doing a lot of work around this. We've been working and chatting with Gartner a little bit around this. You have to be a Gartner subscriber, so I do apologize. We can't give you that content, unfortunately. Gartner's not cheap, but the content is really good. They are all over this because they hear from their customers they have concerns around, SharePoint agents and what it's going to be and everything else. But they have got 3 really, really good white papers: how to mitigate the risks of M365 Copilot agent sprawl. So sprawl, and I agree with them, the next sprawl issue that we've had it with Teams, we've had it with SharePoint site. Agents is probably going to be the next thing that organizations are going to be tackling, simply because of how easy it is to create these agents as well. The cost implications of M365 Copilot chat with agents is another one about controlling costs. And then the other one is how to secure and govern Microsoft 365 Copilot at scale. Orchestry is mentioned in this report, and it's very proud because it is our first report that we've been mentioned in.
Nice.
All right. Not going to have time for a demo, but really quickly, if you're interested in Orchestry, we can help you with this stuff. We've got stuff on the roadmap around SharePoint agent reporting, and in particular permission reporting. Love to show you, but we're out of time, so we'll do that another time here. But if you are interested in knowing more information about Orchestry, get in touch with us here. Lots of questions as well through here. Was that useful for people? I think it was great. Chris, you're
Hopefully
amazing,
so.
man. Thank you so much. It's been by far the best webinar I've seen on this agent stuff, because we've actually seen agents being built, and I've learned one thing I never knew you can do that with Teams. So that's that's amazing. So thank you everyone for your time. Next week, we're doing another webinar around Copilot agents with Andrew Connell. So if you're interested in that, make sure that you register. But Chris, amazing, man. Thank you so much. The link to the recording will be sent as we always are. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And Chris, thanks again, man.
Thanks again, Michael. Always a joy to talk with you.
Nice one. Everyone, have a wonderful day. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.